Welcome once again to another great episode of the Gray Line Podcast. I'll tell you, Benny, ¿cómo estamos? How's the weather over there in Temecula? Is it finally getting a little warm or still pouring down rain?
Oh, it's pouring down rain.
¿A poco? So it hasn't warmed up yet, huh?
No, it's windy, cold, and it's pouring down rain.
Yeah. Well, listen, I am very excited for three things. First of all, I'm excited that God has given us one more day of life, that we're able to broadcast this special show, and that we have our special guests, and you'll be introducing them. I'm very excited of having them on our show, but I'm also excited that we have our brother, our law enforcement brother with us, that he's going to be covering when Sean's not here. Whenever one of us is not here, we have the one and only, the former chief of police from Calexico, Gonzalo Gerardo, also known as Chalo. Bienvenido al show, Chalo.
Hey, David, how you doing? Benny, un placer de volver a verlos, my brothers in blue. How we doing, man? Hey, Benny, we got a little bit of rain this morning. That's about it. It's about 64 degrees right now, but it's windier than heck out here, man. Yeah, you know how we get our gusts of winds.
Yeah.
Ta canijo. But life is good. Como dijo David, you know, gracias a Dios, we woke up this morning.
Yep, in a few more months, it'll be 127.
Yeah, we'll be setting heat records this year. I got a feeling.
Yeah. Well, you know what? Yesterday here in Tampa, in the morning, it was 43 degrees. By the late afternoon, I believe it was 56. This morning, it was 51 degrees in the morning, and right now it's 9 o'clock at night over here. It's 80 degrees outside. Talking about changes, huh? This morning tenía una chamarra, tenía mis pantalones largos, ahorita ando en shorts y ando con una t-shirt, you know?
No está cabrón.
Sí, está cabrón como cambia el clima.
It's like coat on, coat off, you know, sweater on, sweater off.
Exactly.
Hey, just be like our homies, bro. You got if you wear the socks, you know, up to your knees, that means, you know, that's for cold weather.
Exactly. ¿Sabes qué? Con la pelona, I have to wear a beanie because I freeze and then I have to take it off, you know? But with that said, you know what? We want to thank you, LA Times, Paul Morales, for creating our video introductions. Those of you that love or that enjoy watching our introduction, Paul Morales, the CEO and director of LA Times, he made it for us. And Chalo, we're going to get some of your pictures. We're going to put those pictures in there too. So when you're on the show with us, ahí te vas a mirar. Fui calote. Send us a picture when you were a bodybuilder. Acá bien calote.
Yeah, with a donut no, I'm sorry, una conchita y un café de la olla.
A huevo. Paul, once again, my brother, thank you very much, man, for making those videos. I know you're going to make some more for us. Once again, thank you very much. We really appreciate it. I also want to give a shout out before we get started to Becky Evanich. I'm probably killing your name, Becky, but she is actually Sergeant William Hankins' granddaughter. And she watched the show last week, guys. She gave us some really good props. And she's watching the show today. Bill Hankins' family, I believe, is watching the show today. So we're really excited that they're on the show. But without further ado, let's get into our guest and let's get back into the life of Bill Hankins. But before we do, let me just say something. One of the things that I've been telling everybody, Chalo, is that they need to make a movie out of this book. And you know who I see playing Bill Hankins, Sergeant Hankins?
Me.
I see Clint Eastwood. I see Clint Eastwood. Even though he's 90 years old, hey, you could make him look a little younger, but I could see him playing him. I could see him actually directing this, because this is how great this book is, Alpha Guard. And you know what? I'm excited. Without further ado, Benny, it's all yours. Introduce our guest, and let's rock and roll. Listo.
Well, we found Mundo Mendoza hiding in the mountains of South Dakota. So he's giving us the honor of being out here with us today and talk about Alpha Guard. For those that don't know who Mendoza is, it's Ramon Mendoza. He's also known as Mundo. He is a former street and prison gang leader who was a member of the Mexican Mafia for several years. The Mexican Mafia, as we know, oversees tens of thousands of gang members on the streets and inside the prison system. Today, Mundo will talk to us about his experiences while serving time in San Quentin State Prison and his experiences with the Department of Corrections Sergeant William Hankins, also known as Alpha Guard. Welcome to the podcast, Mundo.
Welcome, guys. It's an honor. Thank you for having me on board.
Mundo, I'm going to start off with asking you, our podcast today is about Sergeant William Hankins, Alpha Guard. Can you tell us about the book?
Yeah, the book was you talk about a long shot. I'm just going to give you a brief background without getting too long-winded here. There was a period of time when after I had defected that I was trying to locate some confiscated photographs, group pictures of Mexican Mafia members on the upper yard at San Quentin that we took without sanction. And Sergeant Hankins had confiscated those pictures. And so after I had turned and years later, I reached out to some people in the California Department of Corrections, and I asked a gang investigator whose name I won't mention. I asked him if he could find out if he can reach Hankins. I figured he was retired by now, and reach out to him and find out if he still had that picture. And even though he's retired, I figured every good gang cop has a lot of Rockford files that they keep, and so maybe he had a copy of that picture, and that was I never heard back, and maybe because the person I asked couldn't get back to me directly, I have to reach out to somebody for personal security reasons. And when I finally did, there was no result, no positive result, until I met. When I say I met, this was all done by telephone and by email. I met a death row sergeant by the name of Eric Patau. Name is Sergeant Patau. And so I asked him the same question. Can you locate Bill Hankins? Because I'm trying to find this friggin' photograph. And so Sergeant Patau, man, I mean, you talk about somebody. He was a young guy at the time. A lot of people were saying, well, he's the new Mexican Mafia expert, expert on the topic. And my question is, how can Patau be an expert at such a young age? But he did his homework. He was plugged right in, and he got a hold of the first phone call that he made in trying to locate Hankins. He did find out that Hankins had passed away, and the first phone call that he made was a lady by the name of Pamela Hankins, and it happened to be his daughter. Very first phone call, he hit it. He hit the jackpot there, and he was so happy to be able to speak with Sergeant Hankins' daughter. So in speaking with her, he ends up meeting with her. They were going to throw away a lot of, I don't want to call it junk, but excess stuff that they had in their garage. And then in that were a bunch of photos of prison gangs. He hit the mother load, and he also had an unpublished book, the book that you're looking at behind me, and the topic of this episode, Alpha Guard, which is an appropriate title for this gentleman, for this officer, because he was very tough, very sharp, very plugged into all the prison gangs. And so the history of that book, because I was involved with my publisher, Sergeant Patau, and I reached out to my publisher, who agreed to publish the book with, of course, the blessing and agreement of the Hankins family. And the importance of this book was to tell the story. I mean, this very, very, not only a very moving story of Sergeant Hankins' personal life, because, he started, he was a young man, World War II hero. To me, anybody that fought in the war is a hero. So forgive me for calling anybody a hero that's fought in the war. They're all heroes to me, including Mr. Hankins. And the visual that you're looking at is an older picture of him and his young wife. And He ended up entering the Department of Corrections, I believe, in the late 50s, and became got connected and with gang members that were in behind prison. And he took his he was a tough man. He was a little over 6 feet tall, burly guy, no nonsense, and but he was a straight shooter. In other words, he didn't do anything dishonest, and that's, I think, the respect that he had from the inmates, is that he was not a dishonest cop. He didn't set anybody up, things like that. But he was a hard case. He had a personal philosophy of, when it came to career criminals, throw away the key. I know that sounds barbaric and archaic, but that was his philosophy. He's gonna, and I'll get into that a little later on because I know you have some questions for me. But the book was undertaken by Police and Fire Publishing, and I helped coordinate, participated. Uh, I functioned there behind the scenes, assisting with different information there and stuff. And they put the book out, and the book was all his words, all his work, his words, and many of us assisted. And I got to share this with you. On the day that they launched the book, it was launched in Northern California in two separate venues, and I was flown in from my location by my publisher, who picked me up at the airport. I couldn't go to the first function because it was a Department of Corrections training function, and they wouldn't allow an ex-convict in, and that's fine. That was me. Possible danger element or whatever, and I totally understood, but I was just so tickled pink to be a part of this, because I believed in it, and because there's an ironic twist to this. A former evil guy like myself, and Hankins, would endeavor to put guys like me away, throw away the key, which he did to me, and I'll talk about it later. And now here I am participating in celebrating the launching of a book about his story. So the second venue on the same day after this Department of Corrections function was a sports bar that belonged to the family members of Sergeant Hankins. And so I attended that function, was allowed in. Uh, my publisher had the books there, and there it was a who's who. There were former judges, former FBI agents, former law enforcement guys. There was David Byers, Officer Byers from San Jose PD, that remembered me from way back. You had all these guys, a who's who, like I say, and Pete asked permission for me about Sergeant Hankins, about my relationship with him, sort of like what I'm doing here. And I addressed the family, and the attendees there, and his son was sitting in the audience, and I remember saying, yeah, I can't remember his name now, but let's say his name was Bob. I said, well, I got to tell you, when I walked into this bar and I looked over and saw Bob, who I now know as Bob, when I looked over and saw Bob, I wanted to turn around and walk out the door because I had a flashback. I said, "Oh no, this is Sergeant Hankins." You know, I flashed back to the San Quentin yard when Hankins had those piercing eyes, and I felt like he had X-ray vision, and he could tell if I had a shank underneath my coat or if I had drugs in my pocket. You know, and so it elicited a chuckle there, but anyway, so the book now is has been launched, and we're doing a revision of that, that's going to be coming soon. But anyway, I just thought I'd give you a little preliminary background before I get into your questions, guys.
Hey, Mundo, can you tell us how accurate the story is when Hankins discovered the formation of the Mexican Mafia?
Well, the story is about as accurate as it's going to get, because remember, in those days, there was no internet, there was none of that. So he maintained his files. He had manual files, of course, painstakingly maintained by Sergeant Hankins. He was a laughing stock of his fellow officers. What I mean by that is they knew he was a tough man, so they didn't they weren't laughing at him in that manner, but they would laugh at this notion that there was a prison gang known as the Mexican Mafia. And so every time they'd see a Mexican inmate walk by, they would make jokes like, oh, here comes another Mexican Mafia guy. Ha ha ha. And they start laughing at him. And Hankins would shake his head because what they didn't know is that Hankins had a knack for developing informants, and so he developed informants. That was he was good at that. He was known for that. So people were afraid of Hankins snitches. I'm talking about inmates because they know that he knew his intel. He knew what he was talking about. And in reading the book, I mean, I can't vouch for everything in the book because he had investigations that occurred in places where I wasn't located. But everything he did talk about, remember, investigators are only as good as the intel they receive. So much of it he monitored himself. He made a lot of busts himself, and a lot of it at the beginning in trying to determine which guys were made men, which bona fide Mexican mafia members, and which ones were associates. He had to rely on the information of his informants, and according to his informants, there was a Mexican mafia member behind every bush. A figure of speech when I say that. So the only people that know who's a bona fide member are the members themselves. We know who we recruit into the organization. When you get somebody from another gang, I mean, I always cringe when I hear a rival prison gang talking about who's a Mexican mafia member and who's not. Especially when I know they're not members. It's like, how can you say that? You don't know that. I don't care who you talk to in your circle of people. And that's the same way with Hankins. Hankins talked in his book about over 100 Mexican mafia members. And that's the information he was given. So in fairness to him, he didn't validate them, but he took that information and he put that in his book. Well, I knew that was inaccurate because there was never, I want to say there was back then, there was maybe 15 to 20 at one given time walking the yard of San Quentin. And then you fast forward a few, maybe 10 years, and we never had more than a dozen members. And validated active members, we never had more than say 150 to 200 to this very day. That's about the average when you start considering dropouts. So, but his book is extremely accurate based on what he knows, and then everything else that informants gave him, you have to take it with a grain of salt if you can't corroborate it. But he was the first institutional gang investigator. They call them IGIs, and he set the foundation. He was the first one that made it possible for the rest of the guys. Today, I can tell you this: the California Department of Corrections, when it comes to prison gangs, especially the big four, Mexican Mafia, Aryan Brotherhood, Nuestra Familia, and Black Guerrilla Family, I call them the axis of evil. When it comes to the big four, there's nobody, there's no agency, there's no officer outside of the Department of Corrections that has more expertise than those guys. And I'm talking about the gang guys. I'm not talking about the run-of-the-mill correctional officer that does his job on the gun rail or wherever. I'm talking about the specialists, the guys that specialize in these prison gangs. These are the guys that know their stuff. These are the guys that the street cops should be recruiting and talking to in as a member of a task force or networking with them to get not only the history but the ongoing current intelligence, because these guys know all the stuff. They have informants, they listen to phone calls, they read letters. I mean, on and on and on. They have a ton of information at their disposal, and it behooves local law enforcement agencies to always network with these guys because they're the real deal. So Hankins produced a lot of younger generation IGIs like him. I mean, Bill Hankins was the trendsetter and doing it manually with manual system. And now today you got a lot of guys. I'll drop a few names. Robert Marquez. You got guys like Leo Duarte. Just Brian Perry, Devin Hawks. I mean, on and on and on. The list goes on of guys through decades that all the guys have heard of them. When we all active prison gang members know who these guys are through those decades. They've heard those names. They know who they are. And Hankins was right there at the beginning.
So Mundo, so you did time in San Quentin. Can you tell us about some of your memories?
Yeah, in conjunction with Sergeant Hankins, yes, of course. My first encounter with Sergeant Hankins was in 1970. Uh, I saw him handcuffing a Mexican Mafia member who had been released from the adjustment center, contrary to his wishes. See, Sergeant Hankins, his uh, his way of controlling the San Quentin yard between 1968 and 1970 was through the use of course, his informants, and he had one of our rival prison gangs had the run of that yard. They had an event in 1968 that was called the San Quentin Shoe War, and it was a rebellion of Mexican inmates that they got fed up with the Mexican mafia's oppressiveness, taking advantage and killing fellow Mexican American inmates. And so they rose up again. Remaining members, there was like 4 members left on the main population, and so they moved on them. And the main instigators were members of the NF, the Nuestra Familia prison gang. And so you had a collaboration, guys from El Paso, guys from different LA gangs that were sympathetic and anti-Mexican mafia. And Hankins already had an inkling of what was going on, but didn't know exactly what was going to happen. I mean, Sergeant Hankins would never collaborate with anybody, when it came to violence like that. His job was to try to maintain peace on the yard. So once the yard was taken over by this new prison gang that was previously under the radar, the Nuestra Familia, then Hankins had developed, and this is unbeknownst to me. I didn't know about this until I saw the book. When I read the book, I said, wow, I mean, who would have thought this? I mean, we all throw propaganda against each other and all that, but I never would have thought in my wildest dreams that our principal rival on the yard at San Quentin, the NF, the Nuestra Familia, 3 of their big guys, their originators were actually informants of Sergeant Hankins. And they were Freddy Gonzalez from San Diego. If you're looking at the graphic, it's you can see the picture of him on the left, and you had Chalo Hernandez. The second one is Jesse Valenzuela, Black Jesse from Chicas, and Gonzalo Hernandez. They call him Chalo, kind of like your host here, one of your co-hosts, Chalo. Gonzalo Chalo, pero Hernandez was his last name. And he was one of the founders. And so these first wave NF members were collaborating. They were talking to Sergeant Hankins. And I can tell you right now that even if the NF members that I knew on that yard, if they would have known that these guys were talking to Hankins, they would have taken them out. But nobody knew. Okay. And Hankins discusses it in his book because all these guys are now deceased. So when I read it, I'm like, no way. I was wondering why they wouldn't let any Emma guys out in the yard. Why wouldn't they let them out? How did they know who not to let out? Well, there you are. That was your answer. And so that was something else. And so when I met him in 1970, I saw him they released Big Mike from the adjustment center onto the San Quentin yard. Remember, there's no Mexican Mafia members on the yard at that time because of Hankins' control efforts. He had the NF was running the yard without violence. They were selling drugs, doing their thing. That the violence was kept under wraps. So Sergeant Hankins, as long as the violence was kept under wraps, he was happy. Of course, if he caught you dirty with drugs, he's going to bust you and take you in. But he liked the control that he had with the NF being on the yard. So now Big Mike was released by the classification committee, and Hankins was unaware of this. It's like, how in the hell they release this guy without me giving the thumbs up, because he's the head gang guy. So he intercepted Big Mike, and you could see Big Mike protesting. He made him turn around. He handcuffed him and escorted him back to the adjustment center. And then about a couple weeks later, the classification committee released Mike again, but this time Hankins couldn't interfere because the warden, Red Nelson, Warden Nelson is the one that wanted him out. So everybody on the committee voted against Hankins to release Big Mike, and then there was a peace that came. There was a cease of hostilities among the prison gangs, and Hankins became aware of it, but he was very leery. He never trusted the Mexican Mafia, and he was very leery, and so he handcuffed me on one occasion. I was a suspect in a prison homicide, and when I was taken into custody, locked up in B section, he's the one that put the handcuffs on me, and of course I was never charged on that one. The three of us co-defendants that were picked up were never charged. Back in those days, it was extremely difficult to make a case in prison because there was no real protective custody back then. So inmates were not as willing to talk as they are today, and so that kind of frustrated Hankins a bit. And as I said earlier, I was very leery of him because I felt like he could read my mind. If I was going to go out to the yard with a shank, I would have somebody pack for me, like maybe an AB guy or an associate, rather than myself, because I felt that Hankins could read my friggin' mind and know when I was dirty. His piercing eyes, he'd look at you, he'd make eye contact, and I thought I was pretty cool at giving blank looks and all that, but Hankins was something else, you know.
Hey, Mundo, he must have been a great card player, huh?
He must have been a good poker player, man, because he had that poker face. Yeah, but the thing is, a poker player doesn't reveal himself. Hankins, he didn't care what you thought. He's looking right at you. They had a yard shack up on the yard where a lot of the officers, the investigative officers, would hang out, and you would think Hankins would be in there, maybe on the phone or going over his notes. Heck no. He was always outside of the yard shack, milling it amongst the inmates, walking amongst us. He was fearless, and as a result of that, we're always looking for telltale signs of weakness among prison guards so that we can exploit those weaknesses. Well, Hankins would walk amongst us, and all of a sudden we'd see him like breathing down our necks. They go, "What the hell's this guy? This guy, he feared nobody." But as a result of that, we respected him. We respected him because the guy was a macho man. And he's a guy you don't want to mess with. We heard a lot of stories. I won't repeat them on the air, but he gave some people some butt whippings that had it coming. He didn't like guys that took advantage of other guys. There was an incident, and I'm gleaning this from the book, where there was a couple of guys that raped an inmate, and he ended up, without getting too graphic, he ended up giving one of them some therapy. Is the best way I can put it.
He was definitely a sheepdog, protecting the weak. Yeah.
Well,
Benny, go
protecting the
ahead.
weak.
Next question. Yeah.
hey, so you know what, Mundo, and I wanted to say this, before we, got a little bit, but men like Hankins, they're born that way, they're raised that way, and then, man, him being in the Marine Corps and going to combat. I mean, those are rare finds, man. I mean, usually your uh, cops that or people in general that go through all that. First of all, their upbringing probably had great parents, um, and the fact that the Marine Corps shaped them to where he's at, and then you throw him over to World War II, and so that's why he walked around the yard with
Yeah.
so much confidence, because he says, "Man, if I went, probably raised by some strict parents, got his butt whooped when he did wrong, then he goes out in the Marine Corps." Remember, the Marine Corps back in those days, they got to hit the drill instructors got into their faces and whoop some ass too. Then you send him overseas, and he goes there and he's facing these Germans or Japanese, wherever they send him, and then he comes over here and you throw him in a friggin' prison yard. It's for him is nothing. I mean, it's so
Whoa.
the vato
Yeah.
knew, it's like, hey, you know what, you know what, in his command presence, it sounds like he's just. I mean, that's something that you strive to be as a cop, is have that command presence where you don't really have to use force, because people look at you and they say, "Sabes qué? Not this guy, man. Maybe we can go pick on the other guy, but this guy's gonna do some ass whooping." So hey,
Well,
Mundo, let me go.
yeah.
Well, I mean, let me
Yeah.
go to the
Yeah.
next question. Hey, so
Mhm.
you know what? So, what is a director's case, man? I mean, that's one of the things that in the book, it's called a director's case.
Well, well, Miss Sergeant Hankins, he had his finger on the pulse of all the prison gang activity in the Department of Corrections. Of course, primarily in San Quentin, but the guy was the go-to guy that everybody would go to because he maintained rosters. He trained, there was Smokey, the Goon Squad guys, Smokey Thomas, and other guys who I forget, Mike Steinert. Guys like, I mean, these are all guys that were legends back in the department back in the day, and so all these guys, they knew the players. So when things were happening throughout the prison system, we were always manipulating. We were always doing our thing, and most of it were homicides. Most of them were 187s committed behind bars, and we would get away with them. I got transferred out. I went from Vacaville. I went to the Lister program where they were supposed to. I was the very first prison gang member to enter the Lister program in Vacaville, and the whole idea was for them to perform a lobotomy on the most violent inmates, and they were supposed to tweak my brain and take out a part of my brain that controls the violence. And I was the guinea pig, and oh man, on April 25th, 1972, that's the day I got transferred to Vacaville, and I was on the same bus with Robot Salas, a fellow Mexican Mafia member. He's on his way to Folsom, and he's teasing me because I'm going to the cuckoo house. He kept going cuckoo, and I'm like, oh man, I got to toe the line. I stopped smoking. I haven't smoked since April 25th, 1972, and so they helped me in that regard with that big scare. Nothing like that happened, but lot of the brothers started getting transferred out, and Hankins was behind their transfers to get them out. Hopefully, get their brains touched up, but that never happened. And then I got picked up in Soledad, the graphic that was up before. There was the district attorney from Monterey County. He declined to prosecute me for a homicide. There were two homicides committed against a rival prison gang at Soledad. I was one of the suspects. When I returned to San Quentin, they kicked me out of Soledad. I was returned to San Quentin in April of '73. I didn't last, but after I got out of B section, I'm on the yard, and they locked me up and they made me a director's caseload. Okay, well, the director of the Department of Corrections today, they call them secretaries. That's their title. The big cheese today is the secretary. And I think it's a
Right.
lady. Okay. And well, back then they called them directors. So Raymond Procunier was the director of the Department of Corrections. And so when they gaffled me up, I'm walking out of the East Block, and there's Hankins and a group of the Goon Squad guys. The Goon Squad guys walk up to me, and they make me turn around. They handcuff me. I'm protesting. I'm asking them, you know, what's the reason for getting locked up? You'll find out. Well, it was Hankins. Hankins. He he's the only guy that would know the status, who's who in the zoo. The director of the Department of Corrections is sitting off in his ivory tower in Sacramento. So uh, basically, I was among the first SHU units, segregated housing unit inmates, before there was a SHU unit. There was no SHU unit. So basically, what he did, he made me a director's caseload member. And when you're a director's caseload member, the only way you can be released from the adjustment center or the lockup units is with the permission. The director has to sign off on you. But it was really Hankins. Hankins is the one that knew everybody, so he's the one that would advise the director. He's the one that gave him the list of all the heavyweights to lock up in order to ensure the safety of staff and other inmates. So that was my other encounter. Obviously, I wasn't a big fan of Sergeant Hankins back then because I wanted to be able to circulate and do the evil things that I was doing. Of course, looking back now, I can see that he was a genius. I mean, the guy knew what he was doing, and they respected him for that. The administrators relied on him. They even used him to go to conferences and teach the Bureau of Prisons and wardens in other states, and give them the game, give them the template on how all of this developed and how it takes place and how they operate. So he was a man ahead of his time, well ahead of his time. And so the director's case was just a front, if you will. It was a validated way of getting people like myself, career criminals, off the yard until they figured out an official way to keep us there.
Hey, Mundo,
Go ahead. Go
I'm
ahead,
sorry.
Shannon. Go ahead,
No,
Shannon.
no, go ahead, David.
Mundo, the book has a story and mentions Joe Gonzalez, also known as Death Row Joe. Did you ever meet him? Did you ever know him? And what can you tell us about him, especially his dealings with Sergeant Hankins, according to the book?
Yeah, I read that. I did not know Death Row Joe personally because Death Row Joe was on death row when I was on the yard with all the NF, pretty much the first wave NF members that were on San Quentin Yard. And this was in 1970. So DR, that was his nickname. That must have been, he must have got made as an NF member sometime after that. I don't see him getting made on death row. I don't see anybody sponsoring him on death row. So I'm assuming that he got in sometime after he got off the row. So I know death row is probably one of the historically highest placed members. There is an upcoming book, Nuestra Familia Encyclopedia, that will be coming out in April. And it's written by Brian Perry, former SSU agent, and I co-author with him. I collaborate, but he's the principal author. He's the principal author. I pretty much assisted him in certain logistical ways, and so yeah, I'm a co-author of the book, and we have a chapter on Death Row Joe in the book for those that are interested. Now the event or the incident that Sergeant Hankins talks about with Death Row Joe, I have no personal knowledge. I know that he mouthed off to him, and he had a physical encounter where, of course, we all can figure out who came out on top. I mean, Death Row Joe was a little guy, and Sergeant Hankins was probably twice his size. So I don't think Sergeant Hankins was looking to prove that he can physically overpower him, but once you mouth off to somebody like Sergeant Hankins, I think you got to think twice.
Wow. Hey, Mundo, Describe Sergeant Hankins' reputation with the members of the Mexican Mafia. What type of reputation did he have?
Yeah, like I said earlier, he was. We marveled at his courage. To wade among the vatos, the guys on the yard. But we respected him because, you know, with gang members, especially when you reach, the pinnacle, I call it gangster Mount Everest. When you become a prison gang member and you think you're at the top of the heap, top of the world, so to speak, in that world, uh, your whole life is patterned around a warrior mentality. Okay, so now all of a sudden you have a guy, could be a police officer, and in this case it was a Sergeant Hankins, who's got a warrior mentality that you can measure tangibly. We know the encounters he's had. We know what he's done. We know what he can do. Not only does he have an intimidation presence, a physical intimidation presence, but he also has the power as the gang sergeant, to put us away. So you got to navigate if you want to be out there to do your stuff, to move drugs, to kill people, to do all the things you're doing. If you want to be out on that yard, then you have to navigate carefully, and you better not disrespect Sergeant Hankins. Actually, we weren't in the business of disrespecting correctional officers anyway, but we did look, like I said earlier, to exploit the weaker, the COs, and Hankins for sure. His reputation did precede him. It generated respect. Mexican mafia guys, we affectionately referred to him as Hank, or simply Sergeant Hankins. And his fellow officers, of course, it was Bill Hankins. His formal name would be William Hankins, but amongst the inmates, it was Hank or Sergeant Hankins, and the respect, he gave respect, and also we gave it to him as well. So it was a mutual. It was a mutual feeling, a mutual way of progressing, or navigating, and that's the way it was, behind bars anyway. Most of the officers, they gave respect, but it's a two-way street. It isn't like, I think today there's some county jails where the officers are supposed to call everybody sir, and the guys treat them like crap, and it's like, wait a minute, we've come a long way now, where you can disrespect, an officer, and get away with it. In the county jail, with the sheriff's deputies. I remember, if you mouthed off to a deputy, you got 15, 20 deputies on your butt, and they throw a Pearl Harbor on you, and they'd whip your butt, and everybody knew those are just that's the game. That's the way. Those are the rules of the game. You disrespect, you're going to get whipped, and you're not going to get killed, but you're going to get your butt whipped. And so respect was important, both ways. And Hankins was old school. When he said that he believed in throwing away the key, I know exactly what he meant. Now I know exactly what he meant. Back then, I disagreed with him because, you know, uh, uh, there's nothing wrong with me. You haven't caught me doing anything bad. That's the operative word. You haven't caught me. But in his way of looking at it, what do you do with a cancer? Do you let a cancer spread to infect the body? Of course not. You isolate that cancer so that it cannot infect the body. So his idea is not archaic. It applies to this day. If you have prison gang members like the Ronnie Ayalas of the world, you got the prison gang members that, are on their cell phones ordering hits from the inside to the outside. Remember, in my time back then with Hankins, there were no cell phones, but now they have them. So guys like that can sit on death row, can sit on any prison and call shots and have people killed. And these are the kind of guys you want interacting with the body of inmates on a prison yard. That's the cancer. You're supposed to isolate the cancer. So, again, he had that notion way back then. It didn't take rocket science. He was a practical man, and the problem is you run into liberal politicians. You run into people who they're playing a different game, and it's a game to them. And Hankins, fortunately, he was living in a time where he could implement certain forceful designations, like the director's case on us. He could lock people up arbitrarily. Now you get a lawyer involved, and it's like, well, show me the evidence. I mean, yeah, you're right. You got to have evidence to proceed to convict. I get it, but when you're dealing in a custody situation, I mean, you got to let the experts, the gang experts, you got to trust them to do their job. They don't have an agenda. Their agenda is to protect the innocent, and that's what Hankins' job was. He really believed in protecting the innocent. He didn't like bad guys. He didn't like what they did. Let me put it to you that way. It wasn't personal. There's a difference between loving the sinner and loving what they do. And Hankins hated, despised what they did, or what we did, because I was part of that machine.
Hey, Mundo, I have a quick question for you. By the time you debriefed, by the time you dropped out of the Mexican Mafia, Hankins was no longer working at San Quentin. He is now an SSU agent assigned to Northern California, the San Francisco Bay Area. After you debriefed, we've read your book, we know you, we've talked to you, we've heard your testimony several times. You talk about working with SSU, you talk about working with state and federal local agencies on various cases. Did you ever get a chance to work with Sergeant Hankins while he was an SSU agent after you dropped out of the Mexican Mafia?
No, I never did. I did reach out to from my location to different people that reached out to the SSU, connected us just for some intel, but not with Hankins. I do know that as an SSU agent, one of the chapters in his book, and again, I won't go into a lot of detail, but I can just tell you he wrote two chapters in which he talks about Richie Reese. Richie Reese was from Bakersfield, one of the original Mexican Mafia members, and he also was one of the young guys that went that did time at DVI as an original member, and then ended up in the early '60s at San Quentin. And Richie Reese had encounters. When I say encounters, not physical encounters, but they had verbal encounters. And he talks about it in his book. He wrote a chapter about him in his book. A young guy with a lot of influence, a warrior. Hankins recognized that he was a warrior. Of course, he wasn't impressed, and Richie wasn't impressed with Hankins. But there was a mutual respect that ensued. Richie was a boxer. He was a short guy, about 5'6", 5'7", but heavy duty boxer and a killer. Most of those guys were killers because you had Shanks and all that. Well, ironically, you're talking 1961. So 20 years later, Richie, Sergeant Hankins is now a member of the SSU. So he's promoted, of course, and he's out on the streets working surveillance, working different prison gangs, and taking his expertise to the outside. And so sometime in the 80s, like in 1980, 81, Richie gets into an altercation at Folsom Prison, and where he gets piped, gets hit on the head with a pipe. Uh, doesn't require extensive hospitalization, anything like that. He wasn't knocked out unconscious or anything. But all of a sudden, he started talking differently. So everybody theorized, the fellas in Folsom theorized that he had maybe suffered some brain damage. So that was used as a reason to greenlight him. So they gave the assignment to a member, well, younger, he's about my age, Spider from Eloyo, Spider Arriaga, and his assignment was to take him out. So Spider caught him on the yard, thinking he could just rock him to sleep and catch him unawares. And Richie saw the body language, saw the shank coming. He got hit. He got hit a few times, but not fatally. Richie was able to dodge it and fire him up. He dropped his knife. The staff members, well, Spider fell as well. The staff members came, they broke it up. And as they're handcuffing Richie and taking him away, he tells Spider, "Tell you tell the carnales I said next time send a man. Don't send don't send a boy to do a man's job." And so he went. He was pissed. He was ticked off. He's locked up because they how dare after all the dedication he dedicated his life over 20 years to the fellas, and now they just out of the blue they don't give him the benefit of the doubt, and they seek to take him out. And so as he's sitting in his isolation cell, he makes a decision to turn. He says, "You know what? I'm going to show these guys." So he asked specifically to speak to Hankins. So why Hankins? You know, Hankins wasn't a sweet talker, but yet, he did have that expression about you can get more out of David. You know that expression, David.
Yes, you get more with honey. You get more bees with honey than with vinegar. Yes.
Then with vinegar. Yeah, yeah.
Hey, David, did we lose him?
Yeah, I think we lost them. Mundo, you still there? You know what? While he's coming on, guys, I think we lost him. I think his internet probably went down. You there,
Back?
Mundo? Okay, you're back.
Yeah.
Back again. Okay, here we go.
Okay. So anyway, 20 years later, Rich remembers Hankins from 1961, and 20 years later, when he not realizing he's not a sergeant anymore, he's an SSU agent. So it was Hankins who interviewed him and took his debrief, and the rest is history. Of course, Richie defected. Sergeant Hankins moved on to complete his career, and I heard he retired at some point. I didn't know he had passed until after.
Okay, and that's a follow-up question with Benny. Go ahead, Benny.
So, Mundo, can you tell us about his funeral? Did you attend?
No, I didn't attend, but I know the players. He actually had. Well, first, I'm sorry. Let me go back just a little bit, because in the book I'm remembering he had a retirement party. He had two parties actually. The first party was for all the bigwigs, all the former judges, and it was very formal. Everybody had to be on their best conduct, no F words, no F bombs coming out of your mouth, all of that kind of stuff. All right. So that was fine. His wife was with him, and of course he's not gonna do anything disrespectful to his wife either. And so, or I mean, say anything. He doesn't want any of the guys cussing or whatever. The second retirement party was for all the task force guys, and I knew just about everybody on that task force, and a lot of the guys from his crew. Again, the one that stands out is Smokey Thomas, and then some of the other guys, the Goon Squad guys, and I saw pictures of them. Sorry, I couldn't get you some to share with you, but they're in the book. They're in Alpha Guard. Some of them are, and that one was more, for lack of a better way of putting it, that was more informal. Okay, so guys let their hair down a little, and maybe had a few brewskis more than at the formal one, and they had a lot more fun. And again, then at the funeral, no, like I said earlier, I didn't even know he had passed. Here I am trying to get guys to locate him, and when Sergeant Patau finally located Pamela Hankins, his daughter, he discovered that he had already passed away. So he made an impact in his life and in his career. I'm sure his family can attest that, his impact as a father, grandfather, and all that was amazing. And now as he pursued his career, he was a mover and shaker. I mean, look, we're talking about him today.
Yes.
He entered the system in '59. So what? 64 years later, here we are, uh, four older guys talking about Sergeant Hankins. You know,
Honoring him, honoring his
and
life, honoring his legacy.
yeah,
Yes.
yes,
Yeah.
sir. And I'm a former knucklehead, and the same thing. I give him his due, thumbs up to him, and now I look at him through a different prism. But even back then, like I said, when I was a knucklehead, I still would look at him through the prism of respect. And now I look at him even more differently. I was honored to participate and help get the book put together. I was honored to meet Sergeant Patel, who was very instrumental in getting this book together. I am still honored to be associated with Pete Bollinger and all you guys who helped get his story out. An amazing story, and I think at some point there will be something done in line with a movie. I really hope that happens because his story it needs to be told.
Yes, it does.
Hey, Mundo, you touched on the fact that you said that you felt honored, co-writing this book and everything. But who recommended the title for the book, the
You
Alpha
know,
Guard? I mean, I know what Alpha means. I tell my kids
yeah,
that I'm the Alpha here at my house.
yeah, yeah. Well, I'll tell you this. I think all three of you are probably alphas, alpha
Yeah,
cops, or whatever you want to call it. I mean, so he represents, Bill Hankins represents the multitudes of alpha cops and alpha guards that are out
He
there.
does.
You know, I mean, he's a representative. He just happened to be the front runner, or he happened to be the OG, or the original guy, and he's his recognition and honor is going to outlive him. And that's the cool thing, is that people will hear his story and watch his story decades after he's gone. His grandchildren, his family members will have the benefit of realizing the impact that he had. He made a difference. So that's a very, very, very cool tribute to him.
Yeah.
yeah. Well, I mean, you kind of answered the I had another just a real quick follow-up question. Is just this man's history. We know his history, the story important. You think it's important for historians, and correctional personnel, the street cop, the prison investigators. I mean, the avid readers. I mean, how important do you think this man's history is? I mean, that's. I mean, to me, it's. I mean,
I
how do you feel?
Yeah, you have in every walk of life you have role models, and your school teachers. How many of us, when you think about when you were a kid and you think of your role models, you think of your school teacher, your mother, your father, maybe an uncle that stands out, maybe a police officer, a military hero, somebody that stands out. And it doesn't have to be connected to any occupation. It's just a role model, somebody who was a role model. Sandy Koufax was a role model to me. He was a baseball player, a pitcher, and
Great.
man, I mean, I remember looking up to this guy. Unfortunately, I went the wrong way, but he was a positive role model. So William Hankins, Alpha Guard, the name. I'm pretty sure. I'm almost 100% certain that title, that name, was given by Pete Bollinger, the guy my publisher. You interviewed him last week,
Yes.
and yeah, and I'm pretty sure it was Pete that came up with the title Alpha Guard, and it was a perfect title. It fit perfectly. He's the ultimate role model. He's a positive role model. Sometimes in this world, you have to kick a little butt. In what you're doing, you have to be a little physical, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that. If you're doing it for good, and you're not taking somebody's life, you're just shaking them up a little. And that's Sergeant Hankins. He did that. He was known for that. Using a little bit of force, to get his message across. And then, of course, I'm sure he brought you some water and some napkins or some, a handkerchief to cry on or whatever. But
Clean up.
he's a tough. Yeah.
Hey, Mundo, that's what my uncles and my dad would call it. Tate quieto, cabrón. They would just smack you over the head, and then they tell you, no llores, cabrón. And then they'll hug you and give you a kiss and say, okay, move on. We all needed that once in our lifetimes, even if we weren't bad guys. I mean, growing up, and even our FTOs and our, the good sergeants we had and our good mentors, they all gave us bigos coscorones when we screwed up, and I prefer to do that, man. Get a coscoron and get corrected and move on. I think I would have been honored to had worked with Sergeant Hankins, man, if in my career. I mean, those are the guys that they're great mentors, and to me, you move on and you become, you take a little bit of part of everybody that's good, and you become great yourself, and that respeto is a big part that, and we all right here, you got David, you got Benny, and we all know that respect got us a lot. Got our asses out of trouble. We heard when somebody was coming after us, when they were going to hurt us, try to hurt our families. I mean, you get, the heads up, and that's, to me, I attribute it to how you treat people, the respeto they have for you, the respect you have for them. And just real quick, like, and I don't, I remember, and I'm pretty sure, Sergeant Hankins was the same way, is, he wouldn't embarrass you and try to take you down and do something else. But then when he got you and he says, well, how come you didn't get me last time? I said, well, I don't want to disrespect you in front of somebody else, so that probably means a lot. And it's awesome, man. Just hearing this is great.
Yeah.
Hey,
Mundo, go ahead, Mundo. I was going to say, we have our last, our last question. Go ahead. Well, we have our last question. We have our last question from retired lieutenant and our brother, law enforcement brother and brother in Christ, Sergio Camacho. What's up, Sergio? Thank you for watching right now. Mundo, if Hankins were alive, would he be working with you or want nothing to do with you? Last question from retired lieutenant Sergio Camacho.
I would hope that Sergeant Hankins, just like he was receptive to Richie when he debriefed and turned and gave his information, his statements to Sergeant Hankins, I would hope, and I think that he would have loved to have sat down and picked my brain and compared notes, and of course I would have dodged a few of his questions. I would have said, Sergeant, Sergeant Hankins, I can't talk about that because there's no statute of limitations. Certain crimes, as we know, do not have statute of limitations. So, he's got his notes. He knows what I was accused of. And then we would just kind of steer around those and kind of laugh and move on and laughing, not because it's funny, but laughing because he knows that what I'm talking about. I'm not gonna let the cold case guys get a hold of me, right? But I would have helped him to the best of my ability. And I believe he would have been receptive. I would have loved to have worked with him at the end, but that's okay. He made a difference without me.
Mundo, we've come to the end of our show. We've been on for an hour and 4 minutes and 28 seconds. What an outstanding show. Mundo, from the bottom of our heart, te damos las mil gracias for once again telling us this wonderful story and bringing to light, like you said before, you know what? It's been 64 years since he came on. This man was a visionary. This man is an icon to every law enforcement, every prison gang investigator, street gang investigator. And to me, I mean, I looked forward to this episode. We are honored to honor him, honor his family. And on behalf of all law enforcement, I want to thank the Hankins family for sharing your father, your grandfather, your husband, your uncle, your tío with us in law enforcement. We are to what we are today because of a man like him. Mundo, una vez más, mil gracias for sharing this great man, this American hero's life story. Gracias. And I think Benny has one more thing to say. Benny, you had something?
Hey, Mundo, there's so many things in this book. I mean, Uh, I wish you could. I would love for you to come back again sometime and talk to us about the so-called San Quentin massacre of '71 and the San Quentin 6 trial. You know, there's
Yeah.
just so much to
Yeah.
cover in that book. You know, I just
Oh,
want to
there
thank
is.
you again.
There is. Yeah, I was
Just thank
there. I
you
was
again.
not in the. I wasn't in the adjustment center, but I was on the main line when the gunshots went off on August 21st, 1971. So that's a very detailed story we can get into. Yes, sir.
Yeah. Thank you so much for accepting our invitation, bro.
Okay. God bless you
Hope to see
guys.
you again.
Adios. All
God
right.
bless you. Gracias, Mundo. Hey guys, what do you guys think, man? What an outstanding story, but told by the man who actually saw him walk the yard at St. Quentin. What a story. What do you guys think about it, huh?
Oh man, you know what? I'm sorry, Benny, but I can't wait till this comes out a movie, man. I mean, there's got to be a movie. Somebody's got to take interest and take the lead, and get this as a movie. I mean, it would sell out. I'd be the first one there.
And you know what? I would love, once again, I've said it, Clint Eastwood to direct it. Could you imagine if he directed it and got his son or somebody to play Sergeant Hankins? Oh my God, it'd be a
Absolutely.
bestseller. Outstanding movie. Yes.
Yes, it would.
Guys, with that said, you know what? Time's against us. But listen, next week we have a special guest. We have Mayra Nunez, a former San Diego gang member. Benny, tell us real briefly a little bit about her. We're excited to have her on our show next week. And what is she going to talk about? And tell us briefly about her. And then we're going to call it a good night.
Well,
Go ahead, Benny.
we actually have Frankie Aragon next week.
Oh, okay.
And Frankie actually wrote, he actually scripted and directed a movie called For Vida. Isn't it for Vida?
Por vida.
Yes.
Por vida.
And it's the story of a female gang member who ended up, she was a shot caller. She was always in trouble and changed her life around. So it's going to be extremely good. It's going to be a good story. And then after that, we're probably going to have Mayra Nunez. Mayra will probably follow his podcast because I think we're going to spend quite a bit of time with Frankie.
Yeah. Perfect. Excellent. With that said, guys, it's time to say goodbye. Chalo, any last words? And then Benny, and then we'll end it.
Órale,
Chalo,
pues,
any last words, brother?
since I'm the new guy and I like to talk a lot like Mundo, that we're probably brothers from another mother. Anyways, my thing is just much, my heart, much respects to everyone, man, who has led a good life, the straight life, and even Mundo, that he debriefed and is able to just teach us so much and learn from him. And people that chose this law enforcement career, man, hats off to you guys. You guys still working. You know what? One of the things, man, just keep on doing it with integrity, because integrity means everything, man. Your word means more than any friggin' major credit card out there, man. No, there's no money in the world that can buy integrity. And I just want to say thank you guys. It's fun. Anytime you guys want me to come on and share some knowledge with you guys and hear these great people. Benny, you're doing a good job getting these people, man. Hats off, carnal. I mean, it's good, man. And I really appreciate everything, guys. Bendiciones, and we'll see you guys next week con el favor de Dios.
Por favor, Dios. Benny.
I just want to recognize all the correctional officers who do the job so few in society are capable of. And just remember to prepare for the fight of your life. Fight dirty, get tough, get mean, train, know the job. Don't hesitate. Stay in a fight and survive. And remember, experience comes from mistakes.
Definitely. And remember also, live a purpose-driven life. Not only a purpose-driven life, but every day wake up with a purpose and fulfill that purpose. And you're never too old to volunteer somewhere, and you're never too old to continue making differences. We are all sheepdogs, and we're born to save. And you know what? Continue the fight, like Benny says. Thank you, and God bless you. We will see you next week.